5 childhood traumas that keep you from being yourself today. As children, we can be easily wounded. More often than not, we do not realize how what happened when we were growing up is affecting us today. Sometimes we do. Can we correct the damage? How we handle our trauma is crucial to our success and well-being. Watch our class discussion and learn the tools few people know about.
Hello, everybody. So as I mentioned during our last video, today I want to start a conversation about trauma, like personal, emotional, intellectual trauma, which actually a more common occurrence that people think, or maybe it's kind of catching on right now, the awareness type of thing, but definitely something we need to look into. And the reason it came up in a previous video is that somebody asked a question that, hey, if you are in a relationship X, so that's the topic that we were discussing, that relationship X is a type of relationship that is not normal. It's a very special kind of relationship that needs to be addressed accordingly. And so what if you're in that type of relationship and you realize that you yourself are not as together of a person as you thought you were, but you have some kind of trauma? And so does that need to be addressed first? And the answer was yes, it absolutely needs to be addressed first, because if you are in a relationship X type of situation, you have no other choice. I mean, if you are going to stay there, you can always leave, but if you decide to stay, you have no other choice but become what I term in my seminars a leader with a good heart, or a successful leader who leads the situation not just for themselves and their benefit, but for the benefit of everybody involved. So that's what a good leader does. They have a broader, a worthier goal in mind, and they are able to pull people together so that something good would come out of it. And so if you are in a relationship X type of situation, this is kind of your miniature domain, miniature kingdom, where you have to be this good leader with a good heart. And that's how the situation is going to be fixed, because you are the only functional person in it, basically. So let's talk about trauma. Okay.
Yes. I actually have a question about trauma,
Okay.
just something that comes to my mind
Sure.
when the subject comes up. Yeah. Do you care if we start with that first?
Oh, absolutely. Yes. Yes, let's go ahead and do that. And usually when I get questions like something's really bothering me, when you say something, it triggers a potent, strong, association in me, as we've also talked in my other seminars about power of associations. They are very powerful, very useful signs of what is going on. So if trauma associates with something for you, then this is definitely a valid question. So please go ahead.
Yeah. So can trauma be hidden? Like
Yeah.
you would have some kind of inner trauma, but you don't know you do.
Well,
Is that possible?
absolutely. Well, yeah, yeah, totally. They are all hidden in a sense, because not very many people that would know they have trauma. I mean, some do. I mean, when it's severe enough, it's kind of hard to deny. But for other people, all they know is that there's just something wrong, something they don't like, from very small things like, why am I always late? Why can't I, ever come to my workplace and function like everybody else. I'm always late, I'm always dragging, I'm not together. What's wrong with me? Or I can't concentrate, or I'm unproductive, or I seem to be always in conflict with my colleagues no matter where I go. I go to this workplace, they're all nice at first. Before I know it, they're all jerks and we're in conflict. So I quit, I go to a totally different place, situation repeats itself. Pretty soon it's like, why am I always the one in those situations? What is going on here? Or same thing as we've been talking about in a relationship, always get sucked in an abusive relationship, or can't form a normal relationship no matter who comes along. Dreamed about a certain guy all your life, meet him, fits kind of all the criteria you imagined you need in a man, and you can't. He even seems interested, but you just can't connect. Or just feeling like a general feeling of just something wrong, my life is just not not together, falling apart. Or the smaller side of the spectrum, just can't seem to get where I want with it. Or I'm caught in a relationship X or whatever. So things like that, to where people feel, hey, I kind of can use some help with that, but they really don't say, well, I have those problems because I have trauma. But in the grand scheme of things, is whatever what even I've just mentioned right now, and things of that nature, more often than not, are connected with some kind of trauma. And as we talk about it, we are going to talk more about it, because there's different degrees of it. I mean, if you think of a physical trauma, it can be a paper cut, or you could be in the hospital after a car accident. So same thing with a psychological trauma. It does not have to be PTSD, which is a very severe version of trauma. It can be something milder, but it would still give you certain symptoms. It would still cause certain kind of problems. So that's why we are going to go over it. But to answer that question that Laura asked, is that, are most people aware that they have trauma? Obviously not. They are aware of specific problems that it causes, or specific circumstances where they end up because of it, which is interesting. That a lot of time people see how symptoms, how they feel, could be related to trauma, but they do not connect attracting certain people and circumstances into their life as a symptom of trauma, which it is, interestingly enough, and I'm going to explain why and how this happens. It actually, once you look at it, it will become pretty clear. There is nothing esoteric here. It's just, it will be common sense once I explain it, but that's down the line. But people don't go around, and nobody goes, oh, gee, I have low self-esteem. Or if, for example, I get hermity, I just want to, crawl, into my room and shut the door and not deal with the world more often. That, more often than not. Or I seem to be the person who gets taken advantage of all the time, speaking of attracting circumstances. So all those three are signs of trauma. But people don't see it as such. They just know there is a problem. And this is why it's a good idea to get some help here.
Yeah, right. I mean, totally. And I totally agree with that too, but this is not what was eating on me when it comes to the question of trauma.
Okay, so what was eating on you then?
Yeah, okay. So I have known this girl, kind of a distant friend of mine, but anyway, she was struggling with nightmares, anxiety, things like that. Sometimes she would get so paranoid, she would just lock herself in her room and get mad when, you know, anyone would go up there and knock on the door, because she felt they were trying to mess with her, like force her into doing something she wouldn't want to do, like control her, judge her, etc.
Wow, like social anxiety?
Yeah, probably. But
Mm.
anyway, the point is she went to a therapist, and therapist determined that she had deep mental trauma because the neighbor boy raped her when she was little, but she has no memory of this whatsoever.
So she does not remember the event at all. That's what you're trying to say.
Yeah, yeah, correct. As far as her perception, it didn't happen. Like she remembers a neighbor boy, the fact that they were playing together every day, going to his house, but she doesn't remember him raping her. But the therapist told her that our minds can suppress traumatic events to the point of basically erasing them from our memory. It's like a protective mechanism of sorts. And this is why she has no memory of the event, but she has all the signs that it did happen.
Wow.
Yeah, that sounds interesting.
Yeah, extremely. So did they charge the boy with rape?
Well, that I don't know, but that's my question for Helena. Do you think it's possible? I mean, if our minds can suppress things to the point of us having no memory of what has happened, how would I know if something didn't happen to me in the past that nobody else knows about, and I myself don't remember, and now it's messing up my life for me?
Well, that's a very good question. And so now remember, we were saying, hey, associations are a powerful telltale sign that there's, like the potency, I should say, of an association kind of matches the potency of the importance of the question. So now we can see why, when Laura hears trauma, it kind of, oh, gee, I got to get this resolved. Because, like she says, hey, if, I mean, that's something, really, it's a very interesting example. And if it's indeed true that our minds can suppress things to the point of not having a memory of what actually happened, well, how do we all know that we are all actually remembering everything that happened to us? Maybe we had some kind of traumatic events that we've totally erased from our memory, and we think we're one thing, but we're actually something different. um, but so it's actually a compound question, so I want to answer it in two parts. And part number one, the first part of this question that I hear is, so what if I had this traumatic event that my mind may be suppressing, and this is what's messing up my life? So as I've already explained, the answer is probably yes, regardless of whatever we're going to come up with and the discussion of the rape situation. But the answer is yes. Probably something did happen to you, and this is what's affecting your life right now. But like I said, it's not something necessarily at the scale of not having a memory and having an altered reality because you're suppressing something, but simply because we don't think of a lot of things that we do and how we act and what happens to us as connected of what happened in our childhood. We'll remember the event, we just won't connect that. And it's important to understand how the way we grow up, how the things that affect us as we're growing up will determine what we do and how we feel. But we'll circle back to that, and probably not even today, but as we talk more about it, we'll definitely talk about that aspect. But let's talk about the concept of hidden rape here. So what I hear Laura saying is that this girl feels she has trauma, she has some kind of issues. She goes to a therapist, and they probably have a discussion of sorts, and the therapist tells her, gee, because you show all the signs of having trauma and you can give me those events, I think you know, you don't remember. I obviously wasn't there, but I think it just had to have happened that this boy raped you, because that's the only thing that you can remember. And from this, I deduct that, you know, this is what must have caused you the trauma, because you're not giving me any other events that we can potentially even, you know, tie in there. And so therefore, since you have trauma, and this is the most traumatic thing that you can think of, you know, so maybe they got in a fight, maybe she was in love with him, you know, who knows how it, you know, came in the picture, but somehow had to have. So therefore, you know, they deduct that, well, that's what must have happened. And the truth of it is that our minds do have the ability to suppress memories. Yes, they do. But our minds also have the ability to remember things that didn't happen, which is a lot more common, as a matter of fact, and takes a lot less severe circumstances to happen, because obviously it's a lot easier, you know, that's why it's more common. And when it comes to therapy, you know, and especially, you know, such tender and such an important thing as your mind, and, you know, I would say your soul, what your emotions, what you are, how you react, how you build your life, I feel people need to be a lot more careful about the therapies that they go to, because at the end of the day, there are good auto mechanics and there are bad auto mechanics. You know, you take your car to one auto mechanic who does an excellent job, but more often than not, he doesn't. You know, it comes back with further problems if the problem is not fixed. You know, there are good painters and there are bad painters. You know, one will paint your house, leave it clean, you know, be gone in 2 days, and the next one will leave a complete mess and it still looks ugly. And same thing comes with, you know, with the idea of therapy. Unfortunately, there are good therapists and there are bad therapists, because, and, you know, we don't have to be a therapist. You know, most of us who've gone to college know that, is that some people study and they put their heart into it, and some people party through college and play basketball, and we all graduate together. So this is why when it comes to my approach, I stress this kind of what they call it DIY psychology, which, you know, maybe is a fair way to call this. But the method of where you take your emotional healing into your own hands, because a therapist can give you advice, but ultimately only you know what is good and right for you when it comes to your mental state. Again, it's a very tender, very complex, you know, very intricate mechanism, and we need to be very careful when we approach that. And so this is why in my approach, I spend so much time on education. I don't want you guys to come to me, pay me for a consultation. It's an hour of my time. I'm going to tell you what to do based on what I know. It's easier for me, but even for me, you know, and realizing this very complex thing of human psyche that we're dealing with, I would much rather give you the information of how it works, so that then you know what is going on and you can make an informed decision on what steps you need to take. Which also helps in the fact that, you know, if I tell you what to do and it doesn't make sense to you, you probably won't do it, you know, or at least won't do it as diligently, as opposed to if you understood why we're doing this. If I gave you a good enough reason of why you need to do something, that there's a lot of motivation. For instance, if I told you, hey, go outside there and do jumping jacks for 30 minutes because it's going to help you, you know, cure your headache, you know, it doesn't make sense. You're probably, you know, not going to do it. But if I explained to you and I gave you a good enough reason why do that, you know, you would be more apt to do this and actually hang through the process. Well, let's say that you once, you can go ahead and try it and see if it works or not. But if it's something that you need to do for a month, will you stick with it or not? That's where your motivation comes in, and that's where knowing why you're doing certain things will carry you through. So that is the difference of the approach that I take. Is I'd rather give you the tools. Yes, it's more work on my end, it's more work on your end, but that way you will know and your body will tell you and will guide you through this, as opposed to giving you a prescription, which, either a drug or a therapy or whatever fix it may be, because prescription is something that's based on statistics. That's something that works for most people in this kind of situation, and this is why it's a recommendation. But you are not a statistic. And just because something is common doesn't mean this is what is happening to you. Oh, it makes sense.
Okay, yeah, I think that's very true. And this is why when Laura was talking about rape, you're probably gonna call this the power of associations. But where my mind went is to the topic of the generation of the Me Too women. So I feel that often instead of getting to the root of the problem, people take the route of the least resistance and simply subscribe to the easiest solution, which is common, without taking the time to dig down to the root of whether it is the case in their case, so to say.
Exactly. And so this is kind of where I was going with this, is that even in this situation of a girl remembering, or rather not remembering, a rape that supposedly happened, and I wasn't there, I don't know the therapist or the circumstances, but it sounds to me like the therapist here is jumping to a prescription. She's seeing the symptoms of, person with emotional trauma. So so do I. I mean, if somebody locks herself in the bedroom and has, what we would term social anxiety type of, signs very potently, obviously, they had some kind of trauma. So what is that trauma? What is more likely is that something very traumatic happened to her and she is suppressing it, or maybe she is not giving the therapist every little detail of her childhood in that particular situation. It's the first time she's seeing that person. And so the only thing she can think of is her memory playing with the neighbor boy. What else is there that she hasn't told the therapist? What's more likely is that she is suppressing that memory, or that she's just hasn't opened enough or hasn't had a chance to talk enough about her childhood for, or the real consequences of her trauma to come out. And this is where I'm saying you guys got to be careful. It's a very complex thing that we're dealing with. And if you really want to kind of, pull your life together, whatever it is, independent, regardless of the word I'm looking for, regardless of whether it's a severe trauma, like you feel you can't function, got anxiety attacks, you lock yourself in your room, or if it's very mild trauma, hey, I'm just always late to work. I would encourage you to take the time and do it yourself, because you and your body know best about this. But let's get back to more likely, and kind of makes me think of something here. So why talking about the generation of Me Too women and why people jump to the easiest solution? I mean, that's our nature, we all choose the way of least resistance. But what kind of bothers me is this is the advice, or that's the route of advice that a lot of professionals take as well. Well, that's the, oh, that must have happened, it's kind of, our human nature loves drama, so we are drawn to it, regardless of what education we have. But think about why I feel, there is a problem with that. Think about it like we, kind of like everybody, even with recent events, got a little bit of visibility of a mortality rate, So here comes smallpox, it's got 90% mortality rate, Common cold has 0.1%, whatever else, you can be guessing at. Let's not go there. But, we all know the mortality rate, will determine how many people would die from a disease. There is also such a term as a morbidity rate, which is how many people will get sick with a particular disease. So say diabetes, and I'm not looking up, what it actually is, what's the morbidity rate of diabetes is. So I'm, shooting from the hip here, but let's say, every fifth person will come up with diabetes. So the morbidity rate would be 20%. And there, more common diseases, common cold, probably 99% of us gonna catch it at some point, if not 99.9 or 100. So that'd be 100% mortality or morbidity rate. And there are rare diseases that, would be 0.001. So what is the morbidity rate of your mind suppressing an event? It's pretty low. It's rare. It would be considered a rare disease. It has to be very strong. What's the morbidity rate of our mind remembering something that didn't happen? This is a lot higher. And, even if you think of yourself, if you tell yourself something enough times, you're going to come to believe it. Like if you were little and you're trying to convince your mom you did not steal a cookie, pretty soon you kind of think, well, gee, did I even have a cookie? Because so that that is a lot higher. So in parallel, let's say remembering something that didn't happen has the morbidity rate of diabetes. So if we think of our, our surrounding, we all know somebody who's got diabetes. And the morbidity rate of suppressing is a rare disease. I want to show you guys a rare disease. It's just something that I was looking at not so long ago. It's kind of, curious, and then we'll talk about that in the context of the Me Too and the likelihood of that happening. And then I'll bring you to a conclusion. So let's look at this one. Let me know when you can see my screen. So this is called a tree man disease. Look at the guy's hands. His hands are actually turning into wood. It's a very rare disease. It's a result of keratosis, to where your tissues, kind of like, the same reason we form, different, pimples and warts and whatnot. Your skin changes and changes its structure. But see, that's what happens to a person's hands when that happens. So this is the feet, they basically start turning into wood. So this one hand is normal, and the other hand is starting to turn into, into this, the keratosis. This is the face of a person who has this disease. Again, the disease is rare. And so the morbidity of the disease would be rare. So my question to you, if we're talking of an event that is this rare, that nobody ever seen in their life for the most part, but all around us, the statistics of people coming out and claiming it is at the rate of diabetes, of of a morbidity that you kind of come in contact with on a more or less regular basis. There is a disconnect. Why am I talking about this? Again, because I want to stress on you, just because somebody's a therapist, somebody's having a common approach, when it comes to you and your well-being, be very careful and evaluate, because there can be something good and helpful out there, or it may not be. Just because it's common doesn't mean it's right, and that's what I always talk about. Be in control and keep that in your hands. If you feel you need to seek help, I would want to strongly impress on you is do not relinquish control just because somebody has credentials, because that's just, we kind of got an example of the disease and I wanted to share that. But it's when it comes to your well-being and your success, it's too important of an issue to just kind of throw to common approaches. And as this example shows, just because there's something common does not mean it's helpful or right. And most definitely does not mean it's going to solve your problems. And if you feel it's not helping, then that's a signal to you. But let's come back to trauma. Actually, what we've been talking about is trauma is something very easily obtained. In fact, let me go back to my screen share here to this guy, because I want to show you one more thing here. I'm going to show you trauma, right? We see this, and you hear smile in my voice, because you're probably going like, yeah, definitely trauma. Kids do this all the time. And kids do this all the time, because if it was an adult doing this, we'd be like, oh, what's wrong? But for a little kid, we're used to seeing this. But it's a person, something affected them to this point, right? And so we as kids can easily pick things up like that, to where as an adults, we don't even think of something as being traumatic, but to a kid who is just developing, is in their formative stage, it is traumatic. If you, and like, it's not to the fault of the parents, in fact, it's unavoidable. A parent comes home from work, they're tired, kid runs out to meet them, and it's like, go away, I'm tired. Nothing against the kid, but rejection, tears, will that leave a trauma? So there's the exposure of it in the childhood is so tremendous. That's why I'm saying we all have it. So this is why it's very important to know about it, to recognize it, to know how to deal with it. And obviously the degree is in question.
I have a question really quick. So, I can totally see how a lot of what we experience today is most likely connected to some trauma. I mean, almost everybody, complains either about social problems, parents, coworkers, or relationship problems, or of course about feeling overwhelmed or an anxiety problem.
Or depression.
Yeah, or ADHD.
Right, exactly. List goes on forever. So why do you feel this is happening? I mean, has it always been like this? Is this a, welcome to the human race type of thing, or something new, a sign of the times, you may call it? Is there something wrong with our society today?
That's a very good question. And so since we're going to be talking about trauma over the next couple sessions, this question, will get answered in a lot more detail. But like what I was just starting to say, number one, yes, it is human race, because number one, like you say, if you think of how tender and sensitive we are when we are kids and how we perceive things, like that boy that we were looking at, somebody probably told him he can't have a popsicle. But if we saw an adult in this kind of mental state, we would say that person's traumatized. So we look at the kid and what he's not, they're tougher than we are. We all know that's not the case. So it's human race to an extent is that, we are very vulnerable to those things. But that's how this world was made. We were made vulnerable to these things. It's also important to remember. And so if this is how we're made and the human race made it this far, well, that means there are reasons for that, obviously haven't hindered civilization, hasn't hindered survival, hasn't hindered human race developing and going forward. So is trauma, that bad then? And so that is question number one, is that how it affects you, and the circumstances of you're living in will determine that. And so this brings us to the second part, is this human race, or is this the sign of the time? The reason that trauma has the effect that it does is, in a sense, the sign of the time, because if you think about it, we are living in a very different era, so to say. Everything, about 100 years ago and past that, was pretty straightforward. It was different communities, there was no airplanes, there was no world travel, everybody lived in a certain community who has developed ways of dealing with things. This is what we do, this is what we don't, this is how things work. Our women do XYZ, our men do ABC, this is what we tell our kids. So there's really not a lot of, variety of experience to deal with. And when something happens, there's usually like rituals or cultural approaches of dealing with it. If a person dies, this is what we do. If, somebody gets hurt, this is what we do. So as of last 100 years, that all went out of the window, because we've totally junked, all past experience. We have industrial revolution, we know it all. So don't tell us what to do, legacy schmegacies, we know it all. And so when people come into this world, they are left absolutely with no guidance. Some parents have communication with their grandparents and they have passed down some kind of legacies. Some ran away from home when they were 16, they have no connection. So we are left to deal with a lot, more on our plate as compared to those, the other cultures. And we don't have any tools to deal with it, because we don't have grandparents teaching us how you act in this situation. We have to figure it out on our own. To add insult to injury, so to say, everything's changing. I mean, the technology, the new things that come up, the availability of information, the demands that we have, also at a rocket speed. Because like, even think about 50 years ago at work, if you have a customer, they line up in line, and so you serve one customer at a time and the rest of them stay by the door and wait their turn. Today, when we have a customer, one is on the phone, another one is on the computer, third one is on Messenger. While you're talking to one, the second one messaging you question marks because he thinks you're ignoring him. And, everybody expects you to do everything now because technology is available. And unlike in the old times, well, they need to go to the library and do research. Therefore, they're going to need 2 hours. Does not exist. Hey, do this research. I need it in 10 minutes. So we definitely live in a different world that presents very different demands. And so what I say in my philosophy section, even on my website, is that It's time we became naturally superhuman, so to say. We need to step on the next level of civilization and development, or we will become extinct. We're kind of in that position to where everything moved on, and if we don't adapt to this effectively, then we are in trouble because we're like dinosaurs. We're falling behind the demands of the current time. Luckily for us, we do have all the mechanisms in our mind, in our emotions to do that, which is amazing to me, is that despite the newness and the fact that technology and times are different, somebody somewhere when they created humans many centuries ago knew this was going to happen. We have the mechanisms built in to deal with it. So, but that's and we kind of deviated from the subject in a sense, because obviously this is a more broader philosophical question, but where it fits in here and what we're going to be talking about is that when it comes to trauma, we do have all the mechanisms we need to deal with it effectively. And yes, we might be subject to more traumatic things these days, as what our grandparents had to deal with, when all they had to do is get up and plow the field and then go home at sundown. We have a lot more battles to fight, so to say, but we do have a lot of tools available to us these days as well. So when it comes to trauma, we are equipped to deal with it and to be functional, and that's what we're going to be talking about. It's in no sense, in no way a threat, and nobody has to be a victim. Again, contrary to popular belief that I preach against, is that no matter how our present world is today, nobody is ever put in a position where they have to be a victim. It's you just gotta know how to deal with the situation. So in the next few sessions, we are going to talk about different types of trauma, what causes it, what kind of circumstances, and our default dysfunctional mechanisms of dealing with it, as masking it up by putting on an image, kind of avoiding reality and putting up a false front, which is called masks. Instead of dealing with it, we put a bandage on it and put it away and hope, if we don't see it, then it's gonna go away. And just like any wound, it sits there and creates problems. And we also are going to be talking how to avoid trauma, how to protect yourself from damage, and most importantly, how to deal with this. But that's all future lectures. So thank you everybody for participation. I'm going to stop the recording here.